He planned my accident, and I had the recorder in my purse. The text said dinner Tuesday, but the photo showed forged signatures waiting at the courthouse. A housekeeper ran up my driveway whispering, "Please don't go in." Strangers sat at my daughter's table with paperwork spread like a closing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Your stomach knows before your head catches up. He thought I'd walk inside and fall. He didn't know I keep receipts. 2 weeks earlier, it all started with a message. Here's the thing. You know that moment when hope sneaks back in and you let it? That was me, staring at my phone, rereading the same line until it felt real. The text came in on a Sunday afternoon. My daughter, Jessica Miller, hadn't spoken to me in over a year. Then my screen lit up with, "Dinner Tuesday? 8-ish. My place." No emojis. No apology. Just that. I sat there at my kitchen table in Denver, coffee gone cold, counting the minutes like a teenager waiting for a call back. I told myself not to overthink it. I failed anyway. I changed outfits 3 times. I picked the green dress Jessica bought me years ago, the one she said made my eyes look less tired. I ironed it even though it didn't need it. I checked my mirror and practiced a normal smile. Big mistake. I drove out to her gated neighborhood 15 minutes early. Old habit. The yard looked different right away. The flowers she loved were gone. The porch light was already on. Something felt off. That's when Maria Lopez came running down the driveway. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She got close enough to whisper, eyes darting back to the house, and said, "Please don't go in. Leave now." I froze. Maria had worked there since Jessica got married. She watched Jessica grow up, helped after surgeries, remembered birthdays. She wasn't dramatic. She was scared. I asked what she meant. She shook her head hard, like words would get her in trouble, and mouthed, "Not safe." Then she turned and ran back toward the garage. I locked my car doors. I started the engine. And then I did the stupid thing. I stayed. I parked across the street where I could see the dining room window. The curtains were open. The lights flipped on. And there they were, Jessica, her husband Kevin Rodriguez, and 2 strangers I'd never seen before. Suits on, folders open. That wasn't dinner. I watched Jessica sit down. Kevin stood, pacing like a manager. Papers slid across the table. A pen appeared. Jessica signed. She smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was flat, like someone told her where to look. My chest went hot. My ears rang. I felt invisible and targeted at the same time. Maria flashed past the window for half a second and shook her head again. Kevin glanced toward the glass. The curtains snapped closed. I put the car in drive. I didn't go home. I pulled into the gas station on the corner and sat there shaking, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror under fluorescent lights. Mascara smudged, hands trembling, 68 degrees outside, and I was sweating through that dress. What would you have done right then? Trusted the text or trusted the warning? Be honest. Comment below. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message said, "It's Maria. Noon tomorrow. Bus terminal coffee shop. Please." I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the window scene. The strangers, the pen, Kevin's timing gestures, and one line that stuck in my head, because later it would matter. Kevin pointing to his watch like time itself was on his side. The bus terminal was loud at noon. I chose a table with my back to a pillar so I could see the entrance. Maria arrived wearing a scarf pulled high, sunglasses on, hands tucked tight to her sides. She sat fast and leaned in. She told me Kevin had been isolating Jessica for months. First friends, then family, then food, counting calories, commenting on her body, deleting messages, answering her phone, making her feel small enough to agree to anything. I felt sick. I said Jessica would never, and Maria cut me off. She said they needed my signature. She said there was a condo transfer and inherited stocks, paperwork queued to file. She said Kevin kept saying, "After Tuesday, everything will be ours." And then she dropped the part that turned my legs weak. She said Kevin joked about wine and the stairs, about how accidents happen, about how the old woman won't be in the way. That was me. Maria slid a small recorder across the table, then her phone, photos of documents, my name, my forged signature, dates circled, filing tabs labeled. Cold truth beats warm lies. I asked why she didn't go to the police. She looked around the room and said Kevin bragged about friends on the force. She said I needed to disappear for a bit, somewhere quiet, somewhere not obvious. I called my lawyer friend David Harris from a landline later that afternoon and told him everything. I packed a bag that night and drove 60 miles out to my cousin Linda Lopez's place in the county. No posts, no calls. Just the weight of that recorder in my purse. I wasn't walking into any house. I wasn't falling down any stairs. Game on. I didn't sleep at Linda's place because sleep felt like permission. And you know that feeling when you're hiding somewhere quiet, but your brain is still back in the city, watching the same scene on loop? That was me. Wrong house, wrong table, wrong dinner. Linda lived out past the last real stretch of Denver suburbs, where the streetlights thin out and the roads go dark fast. Her place was old ranch style, creaky floors, a porch swing that squeaked in the wind, and one of those kitchen clocks that ticks loud enough to annoy you. That ticking became my soundtrack. I laid Maria's recorder on the table like it might bite me. I kept picking it up, putting it down, wiping my palms on my jeans like that would fix anything. My phone stayed on airplane mode. No posts, no calls, nothing that left a trail. I wasn't hiding from the dark. I was hiding from paperwork. Linda made coffee and pretended not to watch me spiral. She just slid me a mug and said, "Honey, you look like you saw a ghost." Then she looked toward the window and added, "Quieter." Or worse. By midnight, I finally hit play. At first, it was just house sounds. Clinking dishes, a chair scraping, Kevin's voice in the background, like background noise. Until it wasn't. He was calm, not angry, not yelling. That was the scariest part. Kevin said, "Tuesday night, she'll be here. We do it clean." A man I didn't recognize asked something low, and Kevin answered like he was ordering lunch. Kevin said, "We need her signature. We need the condo and the stocks. After that, she's not our problem." Then another voice older, a little smug, laughed and said, "Accidents happen, especially with wine." My stomach flipped so hard I thought I might actually throw up on Linda's table. I paused it and just sat there, staring at the wall like it had answers. Linda touched my shoulder once, gentle, and I almost snapped at her. Not because of her, but because my whole body was in fight mode. Some men don't love women. They manage them. I rewound and listened again. Slower. Like if I memorized every word, it would turn into armor. Maria hadn't been exaggerating. Kevin wasn't daydreaming. He was scheduling. The photos Maria gave me were worse, in a different way. Quiet, clean, official. A transfer form with my printed name, my signature, and a spot for notarization. A packet labeled with county filing tabs. One page even had a sticky note in the corner, the kind you'd grab from Office Depot, that said, "Bring ID for notary. Bring ID." Like I was supposed to show up and play along. And there it was again. That flat little smile on Jessica's face in one grainy photo Maria must have snapped from the hallway. My daughter holding a pen. My daughter signing something. My daughter looking like she was somewhere else. If you've ever watched someone you love act like a stranger, you know how wrong it feels. I called David Harris at 7:12 a.m. from Linda's landline because I didn't trust my cell phone not to betray me. David picked up on the second ring, voice still rough with sleep, and I didn't even ease into it. I just said, "David, Kevin Rodriguez is trying to steal my assets and stage my death." There was a beat of silence. Then David said, "Okay, start at the beginning and don't leave anything out." End quote. So I told him the text, the driveway warning, the window scene, the recorder, the photos. And I told him the part that made my voice shake, He said, accident, like it was a grocery list. David didn't argue with me. He didn't tell me I was being dramatic. He went straight into attorney mode. He asked about dates, times, names. He asked if Maria still had access to the house. He asked if I'd told anyone else. Then he said, do not go back to your place. I'm serious. If they ransack it or plant something, you don't want to be the one walking into it. That hit me hard because it hadn't even occurred to me that Kevin would go after my home, too. I owned a small bookstore in Denver, nothing fancy, just a neighborhood spot with used paperbacks and a coffee bar that barely broke even. My apartment was above it. My whole life was stacked in one building, like a Jenga tower. Kevin didn't need to knock it down. He just needed to pull the right piece. David told me he'd drive by my building later, casually, like he was just grabbing a coffee, and check if anything looked off. He also told me, if this goes criminal, chain of custody matters. Don't lose that recorder. Don't let anyone touch it without notes. I grabbed a legal pad and started writing like a lunatic. Timestamps, phone numbers, what I saw, what Maria said, what I heard on the audio. I wrote, Tuesday, 7:45 p.m., so hard the pen tore the paper. Paper doesn't lie. People do. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed, still on airplane mode, but text popped through when you flip it for a second, and I needed Maria. It was a message from an unfamiliar number, short and clipped like she was typing with shaky hands. Maria texted, he's asking where you are. Jessica confused. He says, Plan B now. Plan B. That phrase sat in my chest like a rock. I texted back one line, no names, no details. Are you safe? Maria replied, not really, but I can watch. He leaves phone on desk. I take photos fast. My brain started moving again. That was the shift. Fear is loud, but strategy is louder if you let it be. David called me back at 11:05 a.m., and his voice had that tight edge lawyers get when they've seen this movie before. He said, your apartment door has scratch marks, like someone tried a key and failed, then forced it. I asked, did you go in? He said, no, I'm not contaminating anything, but I did talk to your downstairs neighbor. He said he heard banging around 2 a.m. and thought it was you dropping something, 2 in the morning. Of course. David kept going. And Elizabeth, someone left an envelope under your bookstore door. No return address. It says IRS on the front. I felt heat rush up my neck. Is it real? Not sure yet, he said. But it's meant to scare you. That was the first time I really understood the scope. Kevin wasn't just trying to steal. He was trying to erase my credibility. Make me look unstable. Make me look guilty. Make me look like the kind of woman cops shrug at. He wanted to turn me into the story. Maria texted again that afternoon. He says you will sign or you will be sorry. Then, a minute later, he says Jessica going overseas soon. Overseas. That word hit different. Jessica had never liked flying. She cried the first time we took her to Disney World because the takeoff scared her. Now Kevin was talking about taking her out of the country like she was luggage. You don't relocate someone who's happy. You relocate someone you're trying to keep. Linda watched me pace and finally said, you can't just sit here. I know. I snapped, then softened because it wasn't her fault. I know. I don't know the safest move. Linda nodded toward the recorder. That thing is your safest move. So I called David again and said the words out loud. We need help. Real help. Someone who doesn't scare easy. David didn't hesitate. I have someone. Marcus Johnson. Ex-cop. Private investigator now. He's good and he's careful. I wanted to say no. I wanted to keep this quiet. But quiet is how Kevin kept Jessica. Quiet is how men like him win. By 5:15 p.m., David drove out to Linda's place with Marcus Johnson in the passenger seat. Marcus was built like a refrigerator. Calm eyes, no wasted movement. He didn't offer a big handshake. He didn't talk too much. He just looked at me and said, Ma'am, tell me what you saw and what you have. The ma'am wasn't disrespect. It was distance. Professional. Like he was already putting up walls so he wouldn't get emotional and sloppy. David brought a woman with him too, Sarah Nguyen, a psychologist David trusted. Sarah had soft eyes and a steady voice, the kind that doesn't spike when the room spikes. She sat across from me and said, "We're going to treat Jessica like someone coming out of a fog, okay? Not someone who's betraying you." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, "You didn't see her smile." But my anger wasn't going to rescue my daughter. Precision was. We played the recorder for them in Linda's kitchen, volume low. Marcus leaned in, listening like he was catching every breath. Sarah's face changed when Kevin's voice said, "She'll have wine. She'll go upstairs. And then, she won't be in the way." David paused the audio and looked at me. "This is criminal intent. At minimum, it's conspiracy." Marcus said, "And it's motive." Sarah didn't blink. She just said, "And it's coercive control." The room got quiet. Even the kitchen clock sounded louder. I asked Marcus what we could actually do, like physically, because my brain needed steps. He said, "First, we don't confront Kevin directly. Second, we get Jessica alone. Third, we move fast." "It is not a rest." Maria texted right then, like she could sense the shift. "He booked flight tomorrow, 11 a.m. He says, business, Jessica, alone after lunch." A window. Marcus looked at me. "Can you handle seeing her like this?" I swallowed hard. I can handle anything if it gets her out. That sounded brave. It didn't feel brave. It felt like the last rung on a ladder over a cliff. Sarah said, "When we go in, you don't start with the accusations. You start with the connection. Let her body recognize you before her brain panics." I hated how true that was. We mapped it out right there at Linda's kitchen table like we were planning a robbery, because we were. Kevin stole my daughter by degrees. We were taking her back in one move. Marcus explained the gated neighborhood problem. There's a guard, cameras, plates get logged. We need a reason to be there. David said, "Delivery cover." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. We look like we belong." My phone buzzed again. Maria texted, "He check-in call at 1:30 p.m. Always." "A scheduled leash?" Sarah tapped the table. "That call is our deadline. If Jessica sounds off, he'll move." I looked at David. "What if he comes back early?" Marcus answered before David could. "Then we're already gone." That night, we didn't turn in. We staged. Marcus checked Linda's doors and windows like he couldn't help himself. David sat with my legal pad and made copies of my timeline. Sarah asked me questions about Jessica. Favorite coffee order, what music she liked, what she called me when she was little because she was building a bridge, and Linda did what older women do when things get real. She made sandwiches, wrapped them in foil, and told Marcus where the flashlight batteries were. Around 2 a.m., Maria sent one more message that made my skin crawl. "He says, if you don't come back, you made it worse." Classic. Blame the target. Threaten the mother. Keep the victim trapped. I stared at that text and thought, you have some nerve. Morning came gray and cold. We met at a gas station a couple miles from the gated neighborhood, the kind with a subway inside and a rack of windshield wipers by the register. Marcus handed me a baseball cap and said, "Keep your face down. If there are cameras, we don't give them a clean shot." David had printed copies of Maria's document photos and tucked them into a plain folder. The recorder went into my purse, zipped, like a weapon you pray you don't need. Sarah looked at me and said, "You're going to want to cry when you see her. Don't. Not yet. Hold steady until she's moving." I hated that advice. I needed it anyway. Marcus drove us through the gate behind a delivery van like we'd done it 100 times. The guard barely looked up, the barrier arm lifted. My lungs finally let out a breath. Inside, everything looked too perfect. Green lawns, big houses, holiday lights still half hung from somebody's laziness. The kind of neighborhood where people think bad things don't happen. Bad things love nice neighborhoods. Maria was waiting in the backyard, hoodie up, keys in her hand like she was about to take out trash. She pointed to the back door and mouthed, "Unlocked." Then she whispered, "She's in the living room." I moved like my bones weren't mine. My legs carried me, but my brain lagged behind. Sarah went in first, calm, hands visible. Marcus stayed just behind me, scanning corners. David stayed near the door. Jessica was on the couch with a blanket pulled up, TV on, but she wasn't watching. When she turned and saw me, her face went white. For a half second, she looked like my kid again. Then her eyes went wild. She sat up fast and reached for her phone on the side table. Maria had already taken it. Jessica's hand hit empty air. Her breathing got sharp. She started patting the couch cushions like it had vanished into the fabric. Her voice came out tight. "Where's my phone? Where's my phone?" Sarah stepped forward and said, "Gentle, Jessica, you're okay. I'm Dr. Sarah Wynn. No one's here to hurt you." Jessica's gaze snapped to Sarah like she was trying to place her. Then she looked at me again, and her face hardened in that same flat way I saw through the window. She said, "What are you doing here?" "Mom, you can't just show up." He said, I wanted to grab her. I wanted to shake her. Instead, I took one step closer and said, "Honey, I got your text. I thought we were having dinner." Jessica blinked. "What text?" That was the first crack. David pulled out a printed screenshot of the invitation and slid it toward her like he was handing over a receipt at Target. Jessica stared at it, and her forehead wrinkled like the words didn't fit. She said, "I didn't send that." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. "What do you mean you didn't send it?" Jessica shook her head fast. "I didn't. I swear. Kevin, She stopped herself like she'd almost said something forbidden. Sarah watched her, then asked, "Does Kevin ever use your phone?" Jessica's eyes flicked to the hallway, like the house might punish her for answering. "He checks it," she said, barely audible. "He says it's for safety." "Safety?" "Sure." I opened David's folder and pulled out the document photos. "Jessica, Maria took these from his office. Look at the signatures." Jessica took the papers with hands that trembled so hard the pages fluttered. She stared, and I saw it happen, her face shifting from defensive to confused to scared. She whispered, "That's my signature." "But you didn't sign it," David said. Jessica shook her head again, slower this time. "No, I didn't." Maria stood in the kitchen doorway like she was bracing for impact. Marcus's eyes stayed on the windows. Sarah said, "Jessica, listen to me. If he's impersonating you, it's not just controlling. It's a crime." Jessica swallowed. Her voice cracked. "He said, my mom hates him. He said, you're trying to ruin us." I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue. I just said, "He lied." Jessica's shoulders tensed like she expected a slap. That broke something in me, quiet and ugly. Would you have stayed in that house one more minute? Then the landline rang. It was so loud and sharp that all of us flinched at once. Jessica froze mid-breath. Her eyes went huge. The fear on her face wasn't normal, my husband's calling fear. It was training. Sarah moved in close and said, "Is that him?" Jessica nodded, lips pressed tight. Marcus checked his watch. 1:30, he murmured. "That's the check-in." Sarah looked at Jessica. "You answer like everything's normal, okay? Short, calm, then we leave." Jessica's hands shook as she lifted the receiver. She forced her voice into something steady. "Hey, yeah, I'm home." Kevin's voice came through the line, tinny but clear enough that my skin crawled. He said, "What are you doing right now?" Jessica swallowed. "Just watching TV. I made lunch." Kevin said, "Put me on speaker." Jessica's eyes darted to Sarah like she was about to break. Sarah shook her head, tiny, firm. "Don't." Jessica didn't put him on speaker. She said, "My hands are messy." Kevin paused. That pause was a knife. Then he said, softer, "Jessica, are you alone?" Jessica's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Yes, she lied. I'm alone. Kevin said, open the curtains in the living room. Marcus's head snapped up. David went still. Maria's face drained. Jessica whispered, what? Like she couldn't believe it. Kevin repeated it, calm as ever. Open the curtains. Let me see the room. Jessica's hand tightened around the receiver. Her voice went small. Why? Kevin said, because I asked. It's Ford 1 that. Control doesn't sound like shouting. It sounds like permission. Sarah leaned in and mouthed, no. End the call. Jessica's whole body was shaking. She forced out, I can't right now. I'm not dressed. Another beat. Then Kevin's voice went hard, the mask slipping. Jessica, do it. Jessica's eyes met mine, and I saw a decision land behind them. She didn't argue. She didn't comply either. She said, I have to go, and hung up. The dial tone filled the room like static. Jessica stared at the phone like she expected it to explode. Marcus said, we move. Now. Jessica stood so fast the blanket slid off her lap. She looked around like she'd never seen her own house before. She grabbed a purse off the counter, then hesitated. My passport, she whispered. He keeps it. Leave it, Marcus said. Alive beats documents. Jessica nodded, and that nod was the bravest thing I'd seen in a long time. She turned to Maria and whispered, I'm sorry. Wes. Maria's eyes filled. She said, go, please. We went out the back door. Maria locked it behind us like she was sealing a chapter. Marcus walked us fast to the car, head turning, scanning. The neighborhood felt too quiet, like the air was holding its breath. As we drove toward the gate, I watched the side mirrors like I could will safety into existence. Jessica sat hunched in the back seat, arms wrapped around herself, breathing in short bursts like her lungs forgot how to relax. David called it in a low voice. If Kevin's smart, he's already pulling records. Gate log, cameras. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then we're already late. At the gate, the guard stepped out of his booth and looked at Marcus's car longer than he should have. My pulse hammered in my ears. Marcus handed over the fake delivery slip with a calm smile, like this was just another Tuesday errand. The guard glanced at it, then at the back seat. Jessica ducked her head. The guard said, everything okay? Marcus didn't miss a beat. Ma'am's not feeling great. We're headed out. The barrier arm lifted. We cleared the gate by maybe 10 seconds before the guard's radio crackled, and he looked down at it, brows knitting like he'd been given new information. Marcus hit the gas just enough to not look like we were running. Jessica whispered from the back seat, he's going to know. End quote. I looked at my daughter, thin, pale, eyes too big in her face, and I said, let him know. Because for the first time, his control line snapped. My phone buzzed in my pocket the second we hit the main road. A text from Maria's prepaid number. He called. He's screaming. He's booking the fastest way back. And then, right behind that, another message. He said, find her. Done. Kevin didn't just want my money. He wanted my story. And you know that sick feeling when you realize the other person started the game way before you even knew there was a game? That's where I was. Riding in Marcus Johnson's car with my daughter, folded into the back seat like she was trying to take up less space in the world. We didn't go back to my place. We didn't go to Linda's either. Marcus said it flat, like a rule. We don't double back. We don't make it easy. End quote. So we went to a farmhouse one county over an empty rental Marcus used sometimes for short-term surveillance work. Nothing glamorous. Beige walls, scratchy carpet, a fridge that hummed like it was working overtime. The place smelled like old dust and lemon cleaner, like someone tried to erase the past and failed. It was about 60 miles outside Denver, far enough that the cell signal got spotty and the streets didn't have names you recognized. The kind of quiet that feels safe until it doesn't. Jessica sat on the couch and stared at nothing. Not TV, nothing. Not scrolling, nothing. Just nothing. Every time Marcus's phone buzzed, Her shoulders jumped like she'd been zapped. That's when I saw the training up close. A lot of people think control looks like bruises. Sometimes it looks like someone flinching at a ringtone. Sarah Wynne took her shoes off like we were in a therapy office instead of a hideout. She kept her voice steady and low, like loud would shatter Jessica. "You're safe right now," she told her. "No one can reach you in this house." Jessica's eyes flicked to the windows. "He can," she whispered. Marcus checked the locks again, even though he'd already checked them twice. David Harris set his folder on the kitchen table and started laying out papers like he was building a case right on top of somebody's chipped laminate. I walked into the tiny bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My lipstick was gone. My hair was doing that frizzy thing it does when I'm stressed. I looked older than I felt. I looked like prey. Not anymore. When I came back out, Sarah was holding a bottle of water out to Jessica like it was a peace offering. Jessica took it with both hands and drank too fast. Then she said, barely audible, "He's going to call the police." David didn't sugarcoat it. He might. And if he does, he'll say, "You were kidnapped." Jessica's mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. She knew. That's the part that made me want to scream. She knew exactly what he'd do, because she'd watched him do it to other people, just smaller, quieter versions. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table so she couldn't avoid me. "Jessica," I said, "careful. I need you to tell me the truth." "Did you know about those documents?" Her eyes filled and her chin shook, and she whispered, "I didn't know they were that." He said, "It was paperwork to protect us." Protect. Right. You know that look people get when they're lying straight to your face? Kevin didn't even bother with that. He made Jessica do the lying for him. Sarah asked, "Does he monitor your spending?" Jessica nodded once. "He took my debit card. He said I was impulsive. He'd send me money when I asked." She swallowed hard, like an allowance. My hands curled into fists in my lap. I forced them open. If I exploded, she'd shut down. That's what Sarah was trying to stop. David slid one of Maria's photos across the table toward me. It was a transfer form with my name and a line for notarization. Another photo showed a typed page that looked like a will. My name was on it. The language was stiff and fake, like somebody Googled "last will template at midnight." David tapped the will photo. "This isn't just about a condo. This is about everything you own." I stared at it until the words blurred. My bookstore, my apartment, a small inheritance my parents left me, stocks I'd held for years because I was raised to never sell unless you had to. Kevin was treating my life like a checkout cart. Marcus's phone rang. He stepped outside, quiet as a shadow, and took the call on the porch. I watched him through the window, the way he scanned the road without turning his head too much. Jessica noticed. Her voice got tight. "Is he outside?" "No," I said too fast. Then I slowed down. "Marcus is just checking." Sarah leaned toward Jessica. "When you feel your body go into panic, tell me. Don't hide it. We're not doing secrets anymore." Jessica let out a laugh that was more like a hiccup. "That's funny," she said, and her eyes slid away. It wasn't funny. It was tragic. David asked me if I'd checked my bank accounts recently. I told him I hadn't since all this started because I was afraid of what I'd see. David nodded like he understood, then still made me do it. He handed me his laptop and said, "Log into your online banking right now." So I did. My hand shook as I typed. The screen loaded, and there it was, an alert I'd missed because my phone had been on airplane mode. A request for a wire transfer verification. Not completed. Not yet. But queued. It had a dollar amount. Siwen Batsen Meiyuan. I stared at that number like it was written in blood. David leaned in. "That's not a random amount. That's a move." Marcus came back inside and said, "He's already working the angles." "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. Marcus looked at David, then at me. "Kevin called one of my old contacts. Not directly. He used a mutual. He's asking questions about you. about your business, about whether you've been acting unstable. That was the first counterattack. Some people say you should take the high road. I say the high road gets you buried. David's phone buzzed, and his face shifted. He read the screen, then looked up at me like he hated being the messenger. Elizabeth, your bookstore got a complaint filed against it this morning. I felt my stomach roll. What kind of complaint? He said, financial, allegations of laundering and tax fraud. It's anonymous. Jessica sucked in a breath and whispered, he's doing that because of me. Is safer body. I looked at her. He's doing it because he can. Then Sarah did something that surprised me. She didn't comfort Jessica first. She held up a hand like a stop sign and said, listen to me. This is important. His goal is to isolate you by turning everyone into a threat. Your mother, your friends, the police, even your own memory. That's the whole trick. Jessica blinked at her. So, I'm not crazy? Sarah shook her head. No, you're trained. That landed. You could see it. Jessica's shoulders dropped a fraction, like her body finally got permission to stop defending him for half a second. Marcus asked Maria for an update using a prepaid phone David had brought. We weren't using our normal numbers. We weren't leaving a neat trail, not because we were doing anything wrong, but because Kevin was the type to turn wrong into a costume he could throw on anyone. Maria replied in short texts, like she was typing in a closet. He's furious. He says you stole her. He called HOA security. He called her friends. He's asking for gate logs. David muttered, of course he is. And then Maria sent the line that made the room go cold. He says he's got friends at PD. He says he'll make it official. Official. That word can ruin your life in a day. Marcus sat at the table and drew a rough map on the back of a receipt roads, turns, where the farmhouse sat in relation to Denver. He said, here's the risk. If he gets a missing person report taken seriously, cops will show up, and we can't control how that goes. David frowned. We need to get ahead of it. I looked down at the recorder on the table. It was small, black, stupid-looking, like a cheap gadget you'd buy at Walmart. And it held the truth Kevin didn't want on the record. Receipts don't care who's charming. David said, we can go local police with this. Marcus didn't love that. Local gets messy when someone's got buddies. End quote. Sarah added, and Jessica isn't stable enough to be interrogated like a suspect. So I said the thing that felt like jumping off a cliff. Then we go federal. David's eyebrows lifted. That's a big step. I didn't blink. So is trying to throw an old woman down the stairs. Marcus nodded once, slow. Denver field office. We package it clean. Audio, photos, timeline, witness statement from Maria. No drama, just facts. That became the plan. A real one. Jessica swallowed and asked, am I going to have to talk to someone? Sarah answered gently, eventually. But not today. Today we keep you safe, and we keep you oriented. Jessica's eyes watered. He's going to say I'm unstable. David leaned forward. Then we document everything that proves he's the unstable one. That's how this works. I walked into the kitchen and opened cabinets like I needed something to do with my hands. The farmhouse had basic stuff, coffee, paper towels, 2 mismatched mugs. I found a box of saltines and handed it to Jessica because she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. She took one bite and her face twisted like she expected to be punished. She looked at Sarah and whispered, he doesn't like carbs. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. Eat anyway. Jessica ate. Slow. Like it was a rebellion. That was the first strike. David started making calls from the farmhouse landline, not to the police, to his federal contact, to a clerk he knew at the county recorder's office to ask, casually, if anything had been filed under my name recently, to an accountant friend about what an IRS envelope might really be. Every call was quiet, deliberate, and written down in my legal pad with timestamps. I was building a case and an alibi at the same time. Around dusk, Marcus came in from outside and said, "We've got another problem." Of course we did. He told us he'd driven a loop around the farmhouse and noticed fresh tire tracks near the gravel turnoff that weren't there earlier. Could have been nothing. Could have been a neighbor. Could have been Kevin's people testing distance. He said, "From now on, nobody stands in front of the windows. Lights low, phones off, unless necessary." Jessica hugged the water bottle like it was a life raft. Sarah pulled me aside into the tiny hallway and asked, "Do you blame her?" I said, "Honest, sometimes." Then I look at her, and I don't. Sarah nodded. Guilt is normal. Don't let it steer. So I walked back into the living room, sat on the floor beside the couch, and said, "You can hate me later if you need to, but I'm not leaving you again." Jessica stared at me like she didn't know what to do with that kind of certainty. Then her face crumpled, and she whispered, "He said you'd abandon me." End quote. I said, "He's wrong." One of the coldest things about guys like Kevin is they don't just hurt you, they rewrite you. David came back with a small update from the county recorder's office. Nothing filed yet, but there was a pending inquiry tied to my property record someone had called asking what documentation would be needed to transfer ownership. David didn't need to say the rest. Kevin was lining up the steps. Marcus leaned against the counter and said he was ready to file Tuesday. That was the point of that fake dinner. Get you inside, get the signature, remove the obstacle. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. "Remove?" Sarah watched her carefully. "He ever talk about accidents?" Jessica's eyes went blank for a second. Then she nodded once. "He said you're getting older and accidents happen." She swallowed hard. He said it like he was being helpful. Helpful. Jesus. That night, we set a watch schedule. Marcus stayed up first, posted near the back window with the lights off. Just a silhouette in the dark. David took second shift, caffeine and stubbornness holding him upright. Sarah stayed close to Jessica, keeping her grounded when her thoughts started to spin. I took the worst shift, the quiet one. I sat at the kitchen table with Maria's photos spread out and listened to the recorder again with headphones, jotting down exact phrases. Kevin had said, "Do it clean." Another voice had said, "Slip on stairs after wine." Kevin had laughed quiet, confident, and said, "Nobody questions a fall." It made me want to put my fist through the wall. Instead, I wrote it down. Because rage is fuel, but paperwork is what puts somebody in handcuffs. Around 11:40 p.m., Maria texted again from her prepaid. "He's showing people your photo. He's telling them you kidnapped her." Marcus read it and muttered, "He's mobilizing." It's Darty. Then another text came in right after, shorter. "He came home early." David looked up, eyes sharp. "How early?" Maria replied, "He said he's on his way to get his wife." That's when Jessica started shaking so hard her teeth clicked. Sarah sat beside her and spoke low. "Look at me. Name 5 things you see." Jessica's voice trembled. "Lamp, rug, window, Marcus's boots, your necklace." Sarah nodded. "Good. You're here. You're not back there. You're here." End quote. I watched my daughter do breathing exercises in a farmhouse living room because a grown man trained her nervous system like it was his property. Kevin didn't just want her obedience. He wanted her fear. David said, "We go to the federal office first thing, early, before he gets a narrative lodged." Marcus nodded. "At dawn, we tried to sleep in chunks." Jessica couldn't. She sat upright on the couch like laying down was dangerous. Sarah finally gave her a mild sedative, just enough to take the edge off. Jessica fought it at first, then gave in, eyelids heavy, like her body was exhausted from years of being on guard. I covered her with a blanket and sat on the floor beside her, my back against the couch. Her breathing slowed. It sounded like a child's, finally, and I whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear it, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Outside, the wind pushed against the house. A branch tapped the siding. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across the yard in slow arcs. Then Marcus's phone buzzed, and his face tightened. He held it up for David and me. It was a call log screenshot Maria had sent Kevin's outgoing calls, rapid fire, HOA security, a friend's number, a number labeled detective. David said, he's going to bring cops. Marcus didn't argue, and he's going to make them think they're saving her. 8. Jessica stirred and mumbled Kevin's name in her sleep like it was a reflex. Sarah's face tightened, just for a second, and she smoothed Jessica's hair back like she was trying to undo years with one gesture. I sat there staring at the recorder on the table, the little black thing that could flip the whole script if we got it into the right hands. And then I heard it, a sharp crack from the other side of the house, like glass giving up. Marcus was on his feet in a blink, hand up, signaling us to stay quiet. David's chair scraped softly as he stood. Sarah's eyes went wide, but her voice stayed low as she leaned over Jessica. Another sound followed shoes on hardwood, fast and deliberate, Marcus whispered. Someone's inside, and the living room went dead silent. Hold on to that feeling, okay? Someone was inside that farmhouse, and you could feel it in your teeth. If you've never had that kind of fear, good. If you have, you know exactly what I mean. Marcus Johnson lifted one finger, slow, telling us to stay put. David Harris's face went tight, and Sarah Wynne pressed a hand to Jessica's shoulder, grounding her before the panic could grab the wheel. Then the sound came again, footsteps, measured. Like whoever it was wasn't lost. They were hunting. I kept my breathing shallow and put my palm over Jessica's forearm to keep her from jerking up. Her skin was ice cold. Her eyes were open now, wide and glossy, like she'd been yanked out of sleep into a nightmare she already recognized. Marcus moved down the hallway without a sound, one hand up near his chest like he was ready to grab someone's wrist, the other holding his phone low, screen dimmed. David stayed near the kitchen, shoulders squared, like a man who'd rather get hit than watch it happen. And Sarah, God bless her, stayed calm, like calm was a weapon. This wasn't a burglary. This was a message. I heard a cabinet door open in the kitchen. A soft clink, like a glass set down. Then a pause, like they were listening for us breathing. Marcus whispered, barely audible. Back door. His head tilted toward the kitchen, eyes focused on the darkness, like he could see through walls. David mouthed, Call 911? Marcus shook his head once. Not yet. That's the part people don't understand about these situations. You can't just call and hope the right person shows up. Kevin had already bragged about friends at the police department. He'd already started shaping the story. If the wrong cop walked through that door first, we weren't the victims anymore. We were the suspects. I hate that this is true. But it's true. Marcus eased into the kitchen like a shadow, and I heard the faintest sound of fabric brushing a doorway. Then a man's voice, low and annoyed, said, Hello? Like he expected an answer. That voice wasn't Kevin's. Marcus stayed quiet. The voice tried again, louder. Anyone here? Jessica's whole body stiffened. Sarah leaned in close and whispered, Look at me. Breathe with me. In, out. My brain wanted to scream. My body wanted to run. Instead, I stayed on that couch like it was bolted to the floor, one hand on my purse where the recorder sat, zipped inside like the ugliest little miracle. Then Marcus spoke, finally, calm and hard. Stop where you are. A pause. Then the stranger said, Who the hell are you? Marcus didn't raise his voice. You're in the wrong house. Get out. The stranger laughed once, nervous more than amused. This is Mark. I'm here to check on. Marcus cut him off. You're trespassing. Leave. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone told me everything. Mark wasn't a random thief. Mark had a script. The way he started to say check on like it was official, like he had authority. David whispered to me, welfare check. End quote. Of course. That was Kevin's favorite trick. Make himself the concerned husband, make everyone else look dangerous. The stranger's footsteps shifted. I pictured him in that dim kitchen, looking for faces, looking for a fight. Then he said, Kevin said, and there it was. Marcus's voice turned colder. Kevin Rodriguez? The stranger didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. Marcus said, You tell Kevin Rodriguez he doesn't own this county. Mark's voice tightened. Look, I don't want trouble. He said his wife got taken. He said, David stepped forward into the hallway so Mark could see there were multiple adults, not a lone target. David's voice was sharp now. You broke into a private residence based on a phone call. You're the trouble. Mark backed up. I could hear it. And then a new sound joined the mixed car doors outside. More than one. Gravel crunching. Marcus's head snapped toward the front window. And right then, the world lit up with red and blue, flashing through the thin curtains. Jessica made a strangled sound, like her throat locked up on her scream. Sarah grabbed her face gently between her hands and said, Listen to me. You're not going back with him. You're not. Jessica shook her head, tears spilling. They're going to make me. Not tonight, Sarah said. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered. He called it in. David's jaw clenched. Now it's official. Even, the knock hit the front door like a hammer. Not a polite tap. A real cop knock. A voice called out, Sheriff's office, open the door. My chest went tight. I could feel my pulse in my ears. You know that feeling when you realize the next 30 seconds might decide your whole life? That was it. Marcus whispered. Nobody opens it yet. David said, They'll force it. Marcus said, not without cause. Another knock. Louder. Sheriff's office, open the door now. End quote. Sarah leaned in to Jessica and whispered, You're going to speak, okay? You. Not your mom, not your husband. You. Jessica's eyes darted to me, terrified and apologetic all at once, like she was already bracing for betrayal. I hated Kevin for that. He'd trained her to doubt her own voice. I looked at her and said, low and steady, You tell the truth. That's it. Truth is the only thing that doesn't rot. Marcus walked to the front door, careful, staying to the side like he didn't want a straight line through the window. He called out, Who's the ranking officer? A man answered, Deputy Chris Walker. Open the door. Marcus said, Show your badge to the window. Slow. A shape moved outside, and a badge flashed in the porch light. Marcus cracked the door a few inches, chain still on, and kept his body between the opening and us. Deputy Walker's voice came through the gap. We got a report of a kidnapping. A woman's missing. Marcus said, She's not missing. She's inside, and she's safe. Walker's tone changed less official, more suspicious. Then why aren't you opening the door all the way? Marcus didn't flinch. Because somebody already broke in my back door tonight. Walker paused. You're claiming a break-in? David stepped up beside Marcus and spoke through the crack. I'm attorney David Harris. We have a witness and evidence that the reporting party is using law enforcement to harass and control his wife. The deputy's voice sharpened. Sir, we need to see the woman, Sarah whispered to Jessica. Now. Jessica stood up, legs shaking, and walked into the hallway where the deputy could hear her voice clearly. She didn't go to the door. She didn't need to. She said, Deputy Walker, this is Jessica Miller. I'm not kidnapped. I'm here by choice. Action story. The silence outside lasted half a second. Then a new voice cut in, loud and furious, like it had been waiting for its moment. Kevin shouted, Jessica, what the hell are you doing? Get out here right now. My blood went cold. Even through the door, even through the darkness, you could feel him trying to grab her with his voice. Jessica flinched so hard she almost stepped backward. Sarah's hand shot out and touched her elbow, steadying her. Deputy Walker's tone went awkward. Sir, step back. Kevin didn't. Of course he didn't. He said, That's my wife. She's not in her right mind. Her mother's brainwashing her. I felt something in me snap, hot and bright, but I kept my mouth shut. This wasn't my argument. This was Jessica's. Jessica lifted her chin, eyes wet but focused, and said, "I'm in my right mind. I'm scared of you." Kevin laughed one sharp burst. "Oh my God, this is insane." Sarah leaned in close and whispered, one clear sentence. "Tell them the fear is real." Jessica's voice shook, but it held. "He controls my phone. He took my debit card. He makes me check in at set times. He threatened my mother." Deputy Walker went quiet again. That quiet was different. Less skeptical, more alert. Kevin snapped, "That's a lie. You're embarrassing me in front of cops? Are you kidding me?" And there it was. The me. "Not you, not us. Me," David murmured, barely audible. "He's slipping." At us. Marcus looked at David and gave the tiniest nod. Kevin kept going, voice rising. "Open that damn door. I'm taking her home." Deputy Walker barked, "Sir, step away from the door." Kevin said, "You don't understand. She's unstable. She's..." Jessica cut in, and her voice got louder, more certain. "I'm not unstable. I'm done being scared." That sentence hit the room like a punch. Even the deputy outside stopped talking for a beat. And then Sarah, quiet but firm, said, "Jessica, tell them about the bruises." Jessica froze. My stomach turned. I hadn't seen bruises. Not yet. I'd been so focused on the documents and the threat, I hadn't looked at her body like a mom should. Jessica swallowed hard, then pulled up the sleeve of her sweatshirt. The porch light caught purple and yellow along her upper arm, fingerprints clear as day. My vision tunneled. I tasted metal. I had to clench my jaw so my teeth wouldn't chatter. Kevin's voice went low and mean, like he realized he'd lost control of the narrative. "Put your sleeve down." Jessica didn't. Deputy Walker's voice changed entirely. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention?" Jessica's eyes flicked to Sarah. Sarah nodded. Jessica said, "I need help." Kevin exploded. "This is bull." Walker cut him off loud. "Sir, enough." Then another voice joined in, calmer, older. "Walker, what do we have? A supervisor? Maybe. A sergeant? A different set of eyes?" David leaned closer to the door crack and said, "We have evidence of coercion, forged documents, and threats. We also have audio." Kevin shouted, "Audio? What audio? She's making this up." He sounded scared for the first time. "Fear looks good on the guilty." Deputy Walker said, "Sir, step to the side." Kevin said, "No, I'm staying right here." Walker said, "Sir, if you don't comply, you'll be detained." Kevin scoffed. "For what? Trying to get my wife back from kidnappers?" And that's when Marcus did the smartest thing he could have done. He didn't argue with Kevin. He didn't throw insults. He didn't escalate emotionally. He just said, calm and loud enough for everyone to hear, "Deputy, check his call log. He scheduled her check-ins. He's tracking her." Kevin snapped. "I'm her husband." Marcus replied, "You don't get to own a person." One sentence. Clean, deadly. The deputy outside didn't respond to Marcus, but the energy shifted. Boots moved. A radio crackled. Somebody asked for another unit and EMS. You could feel the system taking it seriously now, which was terrifying and relieving at the same time. David looked at me and whispered, "Now's the moment." I knew what he meant. If we were going to hand over the recorder, we had to do it while Kevin was still outside and still running his mouth, before he could reshape the story again. I unzipped my purse with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, pulled out the recorder, and held it out to David like it weighed 100 pounds. David nodded, took it, and said, through the door crack, "We have a recording of Kevin Rodriguez discussing an accident involving Elizabeth Miller. We also have photos of forged legal documents." Kevin's voice went sharp, almost frantic. "That's not real. That's fake. They're setting me up." End quote. Deputy Walker said, "Sir, put your hands where I can see them." Kevin barked a laugh. "Are you serious right now?" Walker didn't laugh. Hands. Now. Kevin didn't comply fast enough. You could hear the shuffle, the quick movement, the sound of a man who's always been allowed to argue, trying to argue with a wall. Then, clear as anything, Kevin shouted, "Get off me!" A thud, a grunt, a radio crackle. Someone said, "He's resisting." "It's really 5. Jessica made a small sound, like she couldn't believe this was happening. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. Sarah whispered, "Stay with me. Look at me." Jessica nodded, trembling. Marcus kept his stance by the door, ready. David spoke in a low voice to the deputy through the crack. "We also have a witness, Maria Lopez, who can corroborate the forged paperwork and the planned meeting." Deputy Walker's voice came back, strained with the work outside. "Attorney Harris, we're going to need everyone in the residence to come out one at a time, slowly." Marcus glanced at David. David nodded once. We weren't in control anymore. We were in process, and process can save you or bury you, depending on who's holding the pen. Sarah said quietly to Jessica, "You're going first. You're the one they need to hear." Jessica shook. "He'll look at me." Sarah said, "Let him." End quote. Jessica walked to the door with Sarah right behind her, and Marcus unhooked the chain and opened it wider, keeping his body angled so nobody could see into the house too far. The porch was crowded with uniforms, flashlights, radios. The harsh white beam of a deputy's light swept across Jessica's face. Kevin was on the ground near the porch steps, one deputy kneeling beside him, another holding his wrists. Kevin's face was red, furious, humiliated. And even like that, he tried to reach for her with his eyes. Jessica didn't look away. Deputy Walker spoke to her directly. "Ma'am, are you safe?" Jessica said, voice shaking but clear. "I'm safe right now. I'm not safe with him." Kevin snapped, "Jessica, don't do this." Jessica said, "Stop." That word came out of her like it had been waiting years. An EMS woman stepped forward. "Honey, can I take a look at your arm?" Jessica nodded, and the EMT guided her gently toward the ambulance lights, away from Kevin. Sarah stayed with her, talking low, making sure Jessica didn't shut down from the attention. David stepped out next, hands visible, and told the deputies who he was, again, calmly, with the confidence of a man who knows how to speak their language. He asked for a supervisor. He asked for a case number. He asked for the names of everyone on scene. Marcus followed, steady and watchful, explaining the break-in, pointing at the back door, showing the fresh damage. One deputy walked around back and whistled softly. "Yeah," he said. "That's forced," Kevin shouted from the ground. "That's staged." A deputy snapped. "Quiet." Then it was my turn. I stepped onto that porch and the cold air hit my face like a slap. The flashing lights made everything feel unreal, like I was watching someone else's life. Deputy Walker looked at me. "Ma'am, are you Elizabeth Miller?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You're her mother?" "Yes." He studied my face like he was checking for crazy. I held his gaze and didn't blink. Not because I was brave, because I was done being dismissed. David held the recorder out to the supervisor who'd arrived, Sergeant Robert Thomas, according to his patch. David said, "Sergeant, this device contains audio of the reporting party discussing a planned accident involving Miss Miller. We need this logged properly." Sergeant Thomas nodded and held out an evidence bag like he'd done this 1,000 times. "We'll secure it," he said. "We'll also need statements." Kevin barked. "This is a setup. They're lying." Sergeant Thomas looked down at Kevin and said, flat, "Sir, you can explain it at the station." Kevin's head snapped up. "I'm not going to the station." The sergeant didn't argue. He just nodded at his deputies. Kevin got hauled to his feet, still talking, still fighting for control with his voice. Jessica watched from near the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket now, EMT shining a light on her bruises. Her face was pale, but her eyes were locked on Kevin like she was finally seeing him without the filter. Kevin saw her looking and hissed, You're going to regret this. Sergeant Thomas turned his head so fast it was almost funny. Did you just threaten her in front of me? Kevin's mouth opened, then closed. He tried a new angle. I didn't say. Sergeant Thomas said, "Save it." I'd waited a long time to hear a man tell Kevin Rodriguez to save it. David leaned into me and whispered, "We got a case number. We got him on body cam." That threat was recorded. Body cam. That word felt like oxygen. Because here's the thing, Kevin could spin stories all day. A camera doesn't care about charm. The deputies took Kevin away, and the taillights of the patrol car disappeared down that dark road. The whole porch breathed out at once. But the relief lasted about 10 seconds. Sergeant Thomas turned back to us. "Now," he said, "what's this about federal?" Marcus stepped forward. We were planning to bring it to the Denver field office in the morning. Forgery, coercion, possible attempt. The paper trail crosses property and bank transfers. The sergeant's face tightened. That's above my pay grade. But if you've got a credible threat and evidence, we can loop in the right people. David asked, "Can you facilitate that?" Thomas nodded once. "I can call it up the chain. And with those bruises and that threat, it won't be ignored." Jessica looked at me then, eyes bright with tears, and said softly, "He's going to come back." Sarah, still beside her, said, "Not tonight." Jessica whispered, "He always comes back." End quote. That hit me in the gut because it was so simple and so bleak. Marcus walked the back door with a deputy and pointed out the entry point. Mark, the guy who'd broken in, was nowhere to be found. He'd fled when the lights showed up. Coward. Sergeant Thomas approached me, voice lower now. "Miss Miller, I'm going to ask you something straight. Do you believe Kevin Rodriguez intended to harm you?" I didn't dramatize it. I didn't add flair. I said, yes. And I believe he intended to use my death to control my daughter and take my assets. Thomas nodded slowly, like he'd already decided. Then we treat it like a real threat. Good. Because sometimes the hardest part is getting someone official to say the words out loud. They took our statements right there in the cold, flashlights lighting up notepads. David spoke like an attorney. Marcus spoke like a professional. Sarah spoke like a clinician. Jessica spoke like someone waking up in real time. And I spoke like a mother who finally understood what was on the line. When it was done, Sergeant Thomas handed David a copy of the incident report number and said, "I'm assigning a detective in the morning. Jessica needs a protective order. And that recorder? Don't worry, we're going to listen." We loaded into Marcus's car and followed the ambulance to a small ER in a nearby town. Nothing fancy, plastic chairs. A vending machine that ate quarters. Nurses who looked tired, but kind. Jessica got photographed her bruises, her arm, her shoulder. The nurse asked gentle questions. "How long has this been happening? Do you feel safe going home? Do you have somewhere to stay?" Jessica kept glancing at me, like she didn't trust that she was allowed to answer. Sarah sat close and said, "You can say it. You're not protecting him anymore." Jessica's voice shook. "I don't feel safe." "It's fine is..." The nurse nodded like she'd heard this before and hated that she'd heard it before. She handed us a packet with resources and said, "You're doing the right thing." David stepped out into the hallway to make more calls. Marcus stood near the vending machines, watching the doors. Sarah stayed with Jessica. I went to the bathroom and cried silently into a paper towel because the crash finally hit. Then I washed my face, walked back out, and caught David's expression. He wasn't relieved anymore. He looked focused, almost energized. He leaned in and said, "Sergeant Thomas already called his supervisor. They're looping in a task force contact in Denver." My heart thudded. "Tonight?" David nodded. "Tonight." Marcus came closer and said, "Kevin just made a huge mistake threatening her on camera. That's leverage. Leverage. That's the word I'd been waiting for." Sarah looked at me and said, "Do you understand what happened tonight?" I blinked. "He got arrested." Sarah shook her head once. Jessica spoke. "In front of him in front of police. She chose reality. I looked through the hallway window at my daughter sitting on the ER bed, blanket around her shoulders, eyes tired but clearer than I'd seen in years. And I realized Sarah was right. That was the turning point. The phone in David's hand buzzed again. He read the message, and his eyebrows lifted. He held it up so Marcus and I could see. A contact name, then one line. Agent wants to hear the audio as soon as possible. Marcus nodded slowly. That's your weapon. I stared at that text, the words blurring for a second, and I felt something solid settle in my chest for the first time in weeks. Not hope, not relief, control. And you're going to want to hear what that agent said next. By sunrise, Kevin Rodriguez wasn't the loudest voice in the story anymore. And you know how rare that is? Men like him usually stay loud until the very end. The ER doctor in that little town didn't care about Kevin's reputation or his neighborhood gate codes. She cared about bruises shaped like hands. She cared about Jessica's pulse jumping every time a door opened. She took photos, wrote notes, and handed Sarah Wynn a packet that said, Domestic Violence Resources, in plain black letters. Paperwork matters. David Harris stood in the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear, voice low, giving facts like he was reading a grocery list. We have audio. We have forged documents. We have a threat on body cam. We have injuries documented at the hospital. Marcus Johnson leaned against the wall near the vending machine, arms crossed, scanning every person who walked by like the world was still a threat. Because it was. Then David's expression changed. He pulled the phone away and said, Agent wants the audio right now. Sarah's eyes narrowed. On what line? David said, Secure line. I'm stepping outside. Which Himes of one? Axed. He went out to the parking lot with the recorder copy we'd made earlier on his laptop, the file already saved and labeled with date and time. He wasn't playing around. Marcus followed him out, not because David needed a bodyguard, but because Kevin had already shown he'd send people to do his dirty work. I stayed in the ER room with Jessica. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, blanket around her shoulders, hair a mess, face pale in that hospital lighting that makes everyone look like they haven't slept in a decade. She stared at her hands and said, He's going to tell everyone I'm crazy. I sat on the chair across from her and kept my voice steady. Let him. The truth doesn't need his permission. Jessica swallowed hard. He always said you'd try to take me away from him. I leaned forward. Honey, you were already away. You were just standing right next to him. That landed. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't let her spiral into that. No, don't. He trained you to apologize for surviving. Gone. A nurse knocked and asked if a deputy could come in for a statement. Jessica stiffened, like her spine turned to glass. Sarah stepped between them gently and said, We'll do it, but controlled. She's not being interrogated. She's reporting. That little difference mattered. Jessica nodded like she understood the rules of the room now. Deputy Chris Walker came in with a notepad and a quieter face than he'd had on the porch. He didn't act like a hero. He acted like a man who realized he'd almost been used. He asked Jessica, Ma'am, can you tell me about the injuries? Jessica's voice shook. She said, He grabbed me when I tried to leave the house. He said I couldn't go anywhere without him. Walker paused, pen hovering. How often does he do that? Jessica's eyes flicked toward the door like she expected Kevin to storm in. More than once, she whispered. Walker nodded, wrote it down, and asked the next question. Does he control your finances? Jessica let out a shaky breath. Yes. He took my debit card. He monitors my accounts. Walker looked up at me once, then back at Jessica. Does he keep your ID or documents? Jessica nodded. My passport, my social security card, even my birth certificate. End quote. Sarah said quietly. That's coercive control. Walker wrote that down too. When he left, Jessica sagged like she'd been holding herself upright on sheer will. Sarah leaned in and said, You did it. Jessica stared at the blanket and whispered, "I thought he'd kill my mom." My throat tightened. I didn't cry. I didn't want Jessica seeing me fall apart. I just said, "He doesn't get to decide who lives." "I know." David came back inside about 20 minutes later, and I could tell from his face it wasn't just talk anymore. He said, "Agent Angela Parker, FBI. She listened to the key sections. She's opening a case." That sentence should have felt like a movie moment. It didn't. It felt like the first real breath after being underwater. Marcus nodded once. "Good." David kept going. "She asked for Maria's contact info. And she asked if we can secure the original recorder as evidence." "And ITeen," I said. "It's already bagged by the sheriff." David nodded. "They'll coordinate transfer, chain of custody." Kevin's favorite playground was local mess. Federal doesn't play like that. Around 9 a.m., the hospital social worker came in with forms for an emergency protective order. Jessica's hand shook as she signed, but she signed. She didn't ask permission. She didn't look at me for approval. She just did it. That signature was hers. Real, unforced. At Elva, Tretio A. David got a text from Sergeant Robert Thomas. He read it and said, "Kevin's being held. They're pushing for charges beyond the initial call." Marcus asked, "What charges?" David looked up. "Harassment via false report. Trespass. Resisting. And with the audio and documents, fraud, forgery, identity theft, possibly conspiracy." Jessica whispered, "He'll talk his way out." David's voice was flat. Not from body cam, and not from audio. That day, we didn't go back to Denver. We went to a domestic violence shelter intake office on the outskirts of the city, the kind hidden behind a nondescript building with a plain sign. 2 locked doors, a buzzer, a woman at the front desk who didn't smile, not because she was cold, but because she took safety seriously. Jessica clutched my hand the whole time, like she was afraid I'd evaporate. And look, I get it. That kind of fear doesn't fade just because you're in a safe place. Your body doesn't trust signs. It trusts patterns. Sarah stayed with us through intake, helped Jessica answer questions without freezing. Marcus waited in the parking lot, scanning for anything suspicious. David was on the phone nonstop, protecting the legal side like it was a shield. Kevin's first strike was control. Our first strike back was structure. The shelter gave Jessica a room, clean sheets, a lock, and a paper cup of tea. She sat on the bed and stared at the wall like she couldn't believe her life fit into a backpack. She said, "He's going to call my friends." I said, "Let him." She shook her head, panic creeping in. "He'll tell them I'm on drugs. He'll tell them you kidnapped me." David walked in. Right then, holding his phone out. He already started. On the screen was a group text screenshot from one of Jessica's friends. The friend had forwarded it to David. Confused. The message read, "Jessica's been taken by her mom. If you see her, call me. She's not safe." Kevin had signed it with his full name like he was official. The audacity. Sarah leaned over and said, "This is good." Jessica blinked, confused. "How is that good?" Sarah pointed at the message. "It's documentation. It's him trying to isolate you. It's him trying to control the narrative." David nodded. "And now we have a timeline." Kevin kept handing us proof like he couldn't help himself. That night, Maria Lopez finally got out of that house. Marcus drove to pick her up from a grocery store parking lot off a highway exit because Maria didn't want to go straight from the neighborhood. She was smart. She showed up with a tote bag and a face that looked 10 years older than it had 2 weeks earlier. She slid into Marcus's car and said, "He said he would ruin me." Marcus said, "Not if you tell the truth first." Maria nodded. Her hand shook, but her eyes were steady. 2 days later, we were in a federal building downtown, the kind with metal detectors and a lobby that smells like old coffee and bureaucracy. Agent Angela Parker met us in a conference room with beige walls and no warmth. She didn't waste time. She didn't soften her voice. She said, "I listened to the audio. I want the full context, and I want the documents. End quote. David handed her a binder we'd built. Timeline, screenshots, printed photos, bank alerts, the incident report number, the hospital documentation. The binder looked boring. Boring is what puts people away. Agent Parker asked Maria what she saw. Maria told her about the dinner setup, the papers on the table, the strangers with folders, Kevin's instructions, Jessica's confusion. She also told her something I hadn't known yet. She said Kevin had a safe in his office closet. She said she'd seen stacks of cash, passports, and a folder labeled Elizabeth. I felt my stomach roll. A folder with my name? Maria nodded. Yes. Agent Parker's eyes sharpened. Where is the safe? Maria gave the address. She gave the closet location. She even described the brand sticker on the safe's front like she'd studied it. Agent Parker looked at Marcus. Can you corroborate entry points and layout? Marcus nodded. Yes. Then Agent Parker looked at Jessica. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you plainly. Are you willing to cooperate against your husband? Jessica flinched at the word husband, but she didn't fold. She said, yes. That single word hit harder than any scream. Some people think justice is loud. Sometimes justice is just a quiet woman saying yes. The next morning, Agent Parker called David and told him not to go anywhere. She said, we're executing a warrant. I went it. We sat in a coffee shop across from a Target, because life is ridiculous like that, watching David's phone like it was a heart monitor. Marcus had a second phone on the table, and every time it buzzed, he checked it with the calm of a man who's seen worse. At 10:18 a.m., David got the message. Safe recovered. Docs recovered. Hard drive seized. He looked at me and said, they got it. My whole body went weak. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from sliding off the chair. Maria's folder labeled Elizabeth wasn't paranoia. It was real. That afternoon, Agent Parker let David listen to a summary of what they found. Not the whole file, not yet, just enough. They found forged documents with my signature. They found templates. They found drafts of emails. They found a spreadsheet listing my assets with notes beside them, like transfer before filing and notary contact. Experienced. And in the safe, they found my social security number printed on a page, my mother's maiden name, old scanned copies of my driver's license from years back, stuff nobody should have unless they were planning a crime. Kevin wasn't improvising. He was engineering. Then came the salt in the wound moment I didn't even ask for. Agent Parker told David they found a little bag in the safe with a prescription bottle inside. The label had my name on it, a medication I'd never taken. The pills were the kind that can make you dizzy, sleepy, unsteady, a fall waiting to happen. When David told me, I felt a calm rage settle over me so clean it scared me. Kevin didn't just want me gone. He wanted it to look natural. He wanted me blamed for my own death. 2 days later, Kevin's attorney tried his first stunt. He filed an emergency motion, claiming I'd abducted Jessica and exploited her mental health. He included a little smear packet, a screenshot of a customer complaint about my bookstore, a vague IRS letter, and an affidavit from a neighbor in Jessica's gated community claiming I'd been unstable in the past. It was sloppy. It was desperate. David read it, then looked up and said, he just escalated into perjury. Jessica shook with anger, not fear this time. He's lying. David nodded. Good. Say it in court. Court came fast. Temporary protective order hearing. County courthouse, downtown Denver. Fluorescent lights. Metal detectors. Hard benches. The hallway smelled like stale coffee and stress. Kevin walked in wearing a suit like he was going to a fundraiser. He had that same controlled face, like he expected the room to bend for him. His attorney whispered in his ear. Kevin looked at Jessica. And for a second, his eyes did that thing trying to hook her, pull her back into old habits. Jessica didn't look away. Sarah sat behind us, calm, steady. Maria sat 2 rows back, hands clenched in her lap. Marcus stood by the wall like a statue. David leaned toward me and murmured, "Watch him. He's going to perform." He did. When the judge asked Kevin to speak, Kevin's voice got soft, concerned, practiced. He said, "Your Honor, my wife has been influenced. She's not well. Her mother has always been volatile." Volatile me. The judge's face didn't change. Kevin kept going. "I just want my wife safe." Jessica's jaw tightened. Sarah's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, reminding her she was real. She was here. David stood up and said, "Your Honor, we have documented injuries, a recorded threat made in front of law enforcement, and an active federal investigation involving forged legal documents and identity theft." Kevin's head snapped up at the words federal investigation. For the first time, his face slipped. Just a flicker. David continued, "We also have evidence of coercive control, financial restriction, document confiscation, and a false report intended to mobilize law enforcement against the victim." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Rodriguez, is there an FBI case?" Kevin's attorney tried to interrupt. "Your Honor," the judge held up a hand. "Answer the question." Kevin's mouth opened, then closed. Then he said, "I don't know anything about that." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Interesting." Axipli says. David asked the court clerk to play a short clip from the body cam audio that Sergeant Thomas had already logged. It wasn't dramatic. It was clear. Kevin's voice on that clip said, "You're going to regret this." Then the sergeant's voice, "Did you just threaten her in front of me?" Kevin's attorney tried to object. The judge overruled. Kevin sat there, hearing himself, and you could see him calculating. Denial didn't work when it was his own voice. Jessica took the stand and said, "He controlled my phone. He tracked me. He made me check in. He kept my documents. He grabbed me. He threatened my mom." She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften it. Kevin stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. And in a way, he was. The judge granted the protective order. No contact, no exceptions. Gun surrendered. Mandatory distance. Kevin's face went tight, anger leaking out the edges. The judge looked straight at him and said, "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a pattern." That word pattern felt like validation. Kevin left the courtroom with his jaw clenched, but he didn't get to storm out. 2 agents waited in the hallway. Agent Parker was one of them. She stepped forward, held out a document, and said, "Kevin Rodriguez, you're being served. Don't make this harder." His face drained. "Served for what?" Agent Parker's voice didn't rise. "Forgery. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Obstruction. And we're still reviewing the rest." Kevin's attorney started talking fast, trying to control the scene. Agent Parker didn't even look at him. Kevin looked around like he expected someone to rescue him. Nobody did. That's what happens when you build your life on manipulation. Eventually, there's no one left who believes you. The legal part took time after that. Months of motions, hearings, subpoenas, forensic accounting. The bank froze the pending $48,000 request before it could move. That fake IRS envelope turned out to be exactly what David suspected. An intimidation letter. Not official, meant to scare me into silence. The bookstore complaint got dismissed once David handed over proof of the smear campaign. My customers, bless them, rallied harder than I expected. A regular named Donna brought me a box of donuts and said, "Honey, whatever he did, we're not letting him run you out." In expect, I didn't cry in front of her. I cried in the stockroom after she left. Maria got witness protection help in a small, quiet way. Not a movie thing, a real thing. A relocation, a new job connection, a safety plan. She deserved peace. She'd earned it. Jessica moved into a small apartment near the shelter program's transitional housing. She got a new phone, new bank account, new habits. The first time her phone rang, she jumped. The 50th time, she didn't. Progress isn't pretty. It's real. Kevin tried to charm his way through probation interviews and pretrial conditions. He failed. He violated the no contact order twice. Once with a miss you text from a burner number, and once with a voicemail left on a friend's phone meant for Jessica. Those violations got logged. Those violations stacked. Then came the day that felt like the true ending. Trial. Not every case goes to trial. But Kevin was arrogant. He thought he could out-talk evidence. He refused early plea deals. He wanted the stage. So he got one. Federal courtroom. Downtown Denver. Wood paneling. Flags. A judge who didn't smile. Jurors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else until they heard what he'd done. Agent Parker testified. Forensic analysts testified. Bank reps testified. Maria testified with her voice shaking but steady. Jessica testified with her head high. And then the audio played. Kevin's voice filled that courtroom, calm and cold, saying, "Tuesday night, she'll be here." We do it clean. A juror's eyebrows lifted. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Kevin stared at the table like he wanted to disappear into the wood grain. David leaned toward me and whispered, "Watch his face." Kevin wasn't angry anymore. He was trapped. The prosecutor didn't dramatize it. She just said, he wasn't joking. He was planning. That's all she needed. Kevin's attorney tried the unstable mother angle again. The prosecutor shut it down with receipts. Bank alerts. Document templates. The pill bottle labeled with my name. The spreadsheet. The safe contents. The body cam threat. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. On multiple counts. Sentencing came later. Kevin stood in front of the judge. Suit gone. Confidence gone. Eyes darting. The judge looked at him and said, "Your actions show planning, malice, and a profound disregard for human life." Then the judge said the number. Years, not months, not probation, years. Kevin's face crumpled like he'd finally understood consequences were real. Jessica didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just let out a breath and held my hand. Her palm was warm this time. 5 years later, my bookstore is still there. Same corner, same creaky stairs, same smell of coffee and old paper. Jessica comes by on Saturdays now, helps with inventory, makes snarky comments about romance novels like she's reclaiming normal. And Kevin? He's a cautionary tale with a case number attached. I keep the receipts in a file drawer I barely open anymore because I don't need them to feel safe now. I need them to remember one thing. Evil loves silence, and I don't do silence. If that ending felt good, hit subscribe. I've got more stories like this.